Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one I am looking at the 3 uniforms that came out with this patch in the so-called Marvel Universe collection, and that's specifically the Ironman uniform, Prof.X's uniform, and Mr. Fantastic's uniform. So the purpose of this video is to figure out if the characters received a buff, and if they did receive a buff, was it significant enough to warrant getting the uniforms. I also tested the Fantastic Four uniforms that came out, but that'll be featured in another video because they also have a transcendence skill and I have to take that into account when I'm testing. And what I mean is the video would have gotten a bit too long, and since I wanted to get this video out as soon as possible, I left it for the next one. Anyways, the conditions I had to test out these 3 new uniforms was I took the 3 previous best uniforms that these characters had, and then I took them into Null with those uniforms and also into Galactus run in GBR, and then I took the new uniforms to Mythic to match the previous ones and did the same thing. Keep in mind that my results are based off having around 106 physical and energy attack, as well as a 20% physical damage proc, and having around 13% pierce on my cards. Besides that, also note that my Ironman and Prof.X builds don't have a damage proc, they have a CTP of Authority, whereas my Mr. Fantastic does have a damage proc because he has a CTP of Destruction. So if you're looking to see how high of a ceiling these characters have in terms of PvE content, or how well they do relative to one another, this isn't really the video to showcase that. Also, if you're interested in some Alliance Conquest testing that I did, I featured that at the end of the video, so if you want to check that out, make sure to go there. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the results of the testing. Before I can show the results of Mr. Fantastic's newest uniform, I obviously had to do a test with his previous uniform, and I took him into Null stage 9 and completed it with 1 minute and 42 seconds left. So one thing of note for the newest uniform is that his 3rd skill no longer accumulates damage when taking damage. You might think right there that the newest uniform is already worse than the previous one because he doesn't have this buff anymore, but that is not the case. The way that the devs compensated for this change is that they made the 5th skill hit a lot harder with more hits, as well as the 4th skill being able to be cancelled and kind of layered on with the other skills. Previously, Mr. Fantastic didn't have any skills that could be cancelled or layered onto one another. Besides this change, the 4th skill also has about 65% all defense down that ignores immunity, which the previous uniform didn't have any all defense down. I would have said that this would be amazing if he maintained his hero status so that White Fox lead could increase that defense down to a higher value, as well as providing the support buff of around 70% damage, I believe. Unfortunately, that's not the case, and White Fox lead with a new uniform would only give him a higher value of defense down, which is still pretty good. But if you're trying to use the character to clear Null and Mephisto, that obviously doesn't make any difference since all defense down doesn't work on these bosses. With that said, the main benefit of this newest uniform is that it is much easier to play, unlike the previous uniform where you have to sit around and use your 3rd skill at the exact moment to accumulate damage, which obviously converts to more damage done. You don't have to worry about that with this one. So with these changes, the preferred skill rotation would be that you use your 4th skill, and then as soon as you touch the ground after he jumps, you'd go into your 5th skill and ideally proc on that skill as well. If your ultimate is up, then the rotation would obviously be using the 4th skill and then cancelling into the ultimate skill. Just note not to cancel the 4th skill too quickly, because if you cancel it before he drops to the ground after he jumps up, then you'll lose that extra damage. Besides that, if you're using the character for PvE, this uniform might actually be better than the previous one, specifically if you're using a CTP of Rage. I obviously can't confirm this because I didn't do this test, but my theory would be that if you can stack multiple skills on top of one another with the CTP of Rage proc active, then you can do more damage in that short period of time where that proc is up. If you're using the character for PvP, he does indeed get better with this uniform, since all that damage that he previously had from getting accumulated damage is now transferred directly into his skills. And besides that, if the character uses the 4th skill and dies mid-use or is interrupted, that skill will still linger on and do damage. Regardless, since the character wasn't really in the best place for PvP, then the uniform doesn't really change too much in the grand scheme of things. All in all though, I would say that this uniform is more of a side grade than an outright upgrade, although it is kind of like an upgrade because it's easier to play. But in terms of putting him far ahead from the previous uniform, that's not the case. You can see that from the results of the rest of the testing that I did here. Just keep in mind that the results aren't 100% accurate, since I had to juggle a damage proc as well as accumulation with the previous uniform, and obviously just a damage proc with the newest uniform. These two factors may skew the numbers a little bit, but the overall outcome should be largely the same for the various tests. Anyways, you can see here that with the newest uniform, I finished just 4 seconds faster with about 1 minute and 46 seconds left. To see how much better the new uniform is in World Boss Ultimate, where the all defense down does apply, I took Mr. Fantastic into Proxima Stage 99. You can see that even with the old uniform and having no all defense down, but having that 13% pierce damage for my cards, I'm able to complete this stage with 3 minutes and 20 seconds remaining. With the newest uniform here, my team composition is a little bit different because I can't use Nick Fury lead, but my overall damage increase from supports and leadership is roughly the same. That said, with the all defense down provided by his 4th skill, I'm able to complete this stage about 23 seconds faster with 3 minutes and 43 seconds remaining. Since the last test showed how much the all defense down helps for the other stages besides World Boss Legend, for this final test I took it one step further and used Weapon Hex support to see how much quicker you can complete the mode if you rely on the all defense down and maximize its effects. So you can see here, once I hit the co-op button, Weapon Hex will come out and apply that 100% all defense down that starts at a lower value, and then when I use the 4th skill, and then my ultimate skill, the damage will just shoot off. And there you go, Proxima's running for our next phase. So you can already see that this uniform is at least better in World Boss Ultimate, besides being easier to play, since I was able to complete this stage 24 seconds quicker than the previous by maximizing the all defense down effects, and finishing the stage with 4 minutes and 7 seconds remaining. Thanks to Ex-Mercenary and buttons, I was also able to test how much easier the new uniform plays in a game mode that has less restrictive phases, i.e. Giant Boss Raid Galactus. So with the old uniform, I was able to solo the mode in 2 minutes and 53 seconds. Keep in mind that accumulating damage is a bit troublesome in this mode, so I could have potentially cleared the last fight with the old uniform quicker, but ease of use is one of the things that I'm trying to demonstrate with the new uniform. So even though I did solo the fight much quicker this time around, the gap in time doesn't necessarily mean that the uniform is that much better than the previous one. That said, I was able to solo Galactus in about 1 minute and 30 seconds this time around, which is roughly about 1 minute and 30 seconds faster than the previous clear. Again, take this result with a grain of salt, since under ideal situations, I could have max accumulation and probably a shorter time gap between the two tests. Moving on to Professor X's uniform, one of the things that they did change was that they made the 3rd skill not instantly cancelable anymore, as well as it having more hits and the skills having shorter cooldowns across the board. So you can see for the new 3rd skill here, I believe you have to wait till the globe goes red before you can cancel it, whereas for the old one, you can instantly cancel it and get all the hits. Speaking of hits, if you paid attention to the numbers, the new uniform has 12 additional hits on top of the 13 from no uniform. Although these seem like minor changes, the lower cooldown lets you fill up your ult faster, which in turn results into more damage and a quicker clear time. In addition to that, because this is the first uniform for Professor X, you will get a pretty sizable damage increase from all the uniform options, as well as the base 25% increase to attack and defense. But that's only if you can get the uniform to Mythic, and in order to do so, you basically need a Mega Mythic uniform ticket or individual tickets that equate to the same thing. If you try to do it manually, it'll probably take you forever unless they change the way in which the uniform is upgraded, since the only way that you can get the bios is if you get lucky from Danger Room Extreme. Although the stat bump is obviously better for him in terms of both PvE and PvP, the reduced cooldown on his skills not only providing a quicker ultimate charge time for PvE, is also better in PvP since he can more consistently rotate around his skills and apply CC effects and damage. Anyways, without a damage proc, I sadly fell a little short here and wasn't able to complete stage 9 of Null, and ran out of time with 7 bars left. However, with the newest uniform, I not only cleared those 7 bars, but did it with an additional 26 seconds remaining. In this first Galactus test, thanks to Loki, Drew, and Secret Asian, I was able to complete the fight in roughly 2 minutes. In the second test, and with the new uniform, I was able to complete the same thing 33 seconds faster. This might not seem as drastic of an improvement as you saw with the Null clears, and that's because I cleared so quickly, even without a damage proc and just the CTP of Authority, that I didn't really benefit off the shorter cooldown since I didn't go through that many rotations of his skills. Also, if you're wondering why I'm using a CTP of Authority, it's because he basically functions like a mini Doctor Strange in Alliance Conquest and other PvP modes that I often play, and is pretty great at locking down characters. And as you can see here, functions pretty well in PvE modes too. Moving on to the last uniform here for Ironman. Spoiler alert, this one's amazing. So one thing with the newest uniform is that it no longer has all defense down that ignores immunity, unlike the older uniform which has it on its 4th skill, but to a minor amount of about 30%. Regardless, I wanted to see if that played any kind of significant factor in the first few phases of the Thanos fight, so I did a stage 40 run to test it out. You can see with 3 minutes and 18 seconds remaining, I reached the first cutscene of the fight. Then with 37 seconds remaining, I finished the fight fully. With the newest uniform, I reached the same halfway point with 3 minutes and 58 seconds remaining, which is roughly a full 40 seconds faster than the previous uniform, suggesting that even without the all defense down, this uniform is already better just from the raw damage. With 2 minutes and 47 seconds left, I complete the stage, and that's a full 2 minutes faster than the previous clear. That's a ridiculously good improvement and puts him ahead of not only the other 2 uniforms, but most likely all the uniforms of this update. When I tried to do stage 9 of Null with no damage proc and the old Ironman uniform, I actually couldn't get past the halfway point because I couldn't deal enough damage. With the newest uniform, I was able to reach the same halfway point in 1 minute and 17 seconds quicker. Before I show the completion time of this run, if you're wondering what Iron Man's new uniform skill rotation is, it's basically 3 cancel, 5 cancel, and then let 4 play out. If your ultimate is charged, it's basically the same thing, so you do 3 cancel, 5 cancel, and then go into your ultimate, and then cancel that as soon as the beam shows up and go into your 4th skill. Just a quick note though, if you're very quick to cancel the 5th skill, then the animation won't show up and you won't deal any damage, so make sure you don't do that. Also, besides the obvious 200% damage increase when an enemy is below 30% HP, another great addition yet to the uniform is that they changed one of the passives to have about 50% critical damage, meaning that you're probably going to be overcapped on that stat without even trying. This makes it really nice because it opens up build options for your custom gear, so you can use things like greed or regen if you're going for a PvP build, or you can use rage if you're going for a PvE build and you have the critical damage maxed out. And even though the 200% damage increase when an enemy is low on health is pretty awesome for PvE, it's borderline a meta buff for PvP, as you'll see soon enough. But even after horribly botching Null's final phase, I was still able to clear with the new uniform with 1 second to spare. That's a pretty substantial buff, if you ask me, going from not being able to even get to the halfway point to fully clearing stage 9. I wanted to see what the low health damage proc would look like versus an enemy that has a lot of health, so I obviously also did a giant boss raid, i.e. Galactus, with Iron Man as well. Thanks to Mr. Meeseeks and Hulk's 1987, I was able to test a solo run with the old uniform and completed Galactus in roughly about 4 minutes. With the new uniform, I basically cut that time in half and soloed Galactus in roughly 2 minutes. If you're wondering what 30% of 80 health bars is, it's 24. So once I go under that, you'll see the damage shoot off here. And there you go. The last thing I wanted to touch on here, like I mentioned before, is how good this uniform also is for PvP, especially Alliance Conquest. You can see I threw Iron Man on this team to take out a meta team, including Sentry and Dormammu. And the idea for the team here is that Strife provides the debuff lead as well as incapacitation and fracture that stacks onto the enemy, stopping their healing. Deadpool then bleeds the character as well as iframe ignores to chip their health down, and Ironman basically cleans up the rest. I wouldn't necessarily recommend him for timeline, but he is pretty great at this mode. I'm currently running a CTP of Authority because that's what I had before, but I think Agreed or Destruction could work just as well too. In the second test I did, I ran the character with a Reflect team, with the idea being that the Reflect character, i.e. in this case Jessica Jones, would chip the character down to low health, and then Ironman would finish the kill with that damage proc activating. Another interesting thing to note is that if the Strafe ability is used in Alliance Conquest, most of the characters will be around 50% health, and more than likely will dip under 30% health, giving Ironman that damage proc. Here I'm using the same team to counter defenders, so one of the things I was asked in my last video was, what's a good counter for defenders? Well, there's one of your options. Alternative options you have are you can throw Iron Man with Luke and Daredevil, or you can put Colossus lead, Iron Man, and Apocalypse. Apocalypse works pretty well because he counters Daredevil, is energy based, and has CC. Quick last note here, if you're considering getting any of these uniforms, these are what the optional uniforms look like. For Mr. Fantastic, you have Red Skull's Hydra uniform, which is pretty good. And then you have Emma Frost's Marvel Now uniform, which is really not that good. Then you have Groot's Infinity War uniform, which is kind of not so good. And then you have Green Goblin's Dark Avengers uniform, which is okay. And then Silver Surfer Black uniform, which is pretty good. Moving on to Professor X's uniform, you have Bullseye's latest uniform, the Dark Avengers, which is pretty good. And then for the second option, you have Wolverine's House of X uniform, which is good, but not great and should be better. Wasp's uniform, which is mostly just for the passive and pretty good for that. And then for the fourth option, you have Domino's Marvel Now uniform, which is okay, but could have been way better. And then for the last one, you have the 2099 Spider-Man uniform, which is still pretty good. And lastly, for Iron Man, the one that you're most likely interested in, you have Star-Lord's Grounded uniform, his latest one, which is pretty good. Doctor Strange's latest uniform, which is a pretty good upgrade from the previous one. Then you have War Machine's Team Suit uniform, which is not really that great, and he needs a new one. You have Eric Killmonger's uniform, which is outdated and not really good option here. And you have Black Widow's latest uniform, which is a pretty great upgrade from her last one too. And that about wraps up the video. I'll also be making a video coming this week, most likely, about Mephisto and also the Fantastic Four uniforms, as well as how much better they get with their transcendence. I'm going to be providing a full breakdown in PvE and PvP for those characters, as well as including my suggestions on how to build them and how to use them in Alliance Conquest, as well as how to counter them in Alliance Conquest. So if you're interested in that upcoming content, maybe consider subscribing. And if you liked the video or found it interesting, as always, maybe consider liking or leaving a comment. But that about does it. Again, thanks for your time and watching, but the video is now over.